Hey there, future lawyers and struggling first-year law students. Look, if you're feeling totally overwhelmed by your obligations in contracts class right now, just take a deep breath. You are in exactly the right place. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're handing you the ultimate survival playbook for slaying that big, scary oblicon dragon. We're going to take those massive, seriously intimidating textbook chapters and translate them into a structured, highly visual, and actually fun roadmap. So grab your highlighters and let's dive right into this whole shebang. Okay, let's start with the classic boss monster itself. Article 1156 of the Civil Code of the Philippines, it defines an obligation as a juridical necessity to give, to do, or not to do. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. It sounds like super intimidating legalese. But as we break it down in this explainer, it actually reveals a pretty simple, logical system of human relationships. Think of juridical necessity simply as a legal duty, where, well, if you break it, the court can literally force you to comply or pay up. It's that serious.
So here's our cheat sheet for today's 6 boss levels. First, the anatomy of an obligation. Second, the 5 sources. Third, flavors of obligations. Fourth, valid contract essentials. Fifth, void versus voidable. And finally, how obligations die.
All right, level 1, anatomy of an obligation. Before we look at how obligations behave, we really need to know what makes them legally binding in the first place. Every single valid obligation requires 4 key components. Let's use a simple real-world analogy here. First, you have the active subject or the creditor. That's the person who actually has the right to demand the duty. Second is the passive subject or the debtor, the one who's got to perform that duty. Third is the prestation, which is just a fancy word for the actual object or the action being demanded. And fourth is the juridical tie. This is the legal reason connecting them. Just imagine the juridical tie as a pair of invisible legal handcuffs linking the creditor and the debtor together over that specific prestation.
Moving on to level 2, the 5 sources.
So where do these invisible legal handcuffs actually come from? I mean, you can't just walk up to someone and invent an obligation out of thin air, right? Let's rapid fire through the 5 sources. First, we have law, which imposes duties automatically. Think paying taxes or supporting your family. Second are contracts, which require mutual agreement, like signing a lease. Third are quasi-contracts, designed to prevent unjust enrichment. Fourth are delicts, which are basically crimes that also carry civil liability to the victim. And fifth are quasi-delicts. These involve negligence that causes damage. Like if you negligently back your car over your neighbor's fence, boom, the law automatically slaps those legal handcuffs on you to pay damages.
Now, a really interesting concept that honestly trips up a ton of students is quasi-contracts. A prime example of this is solutio indebiti. Imagine you check your bank app one morning and you see the bank accidentally deposited a bunch of money into your account. You definitely didn't sign a contract for that cash, but you also can't just keep it and, book a flight to Boracay. The law steps in and creates a quasi-contract forcing you to return it, purely to prevent you from being unjustly enriched at the bank's expense.
Okay, level 3, flavors of obligations.
Obligations aren't all exactly the same. They come with different conditions attached that dictate exactly when and how a duty must be performed. If we follow this timeline, we start with a pure obligation. This one has 0 conditions and is demandable at once. Easy enough, but what if there are conditions? Well, we have 2 main types. A suspensive condition is an event that basically wakes an obligation up. For example, in a contract to sell a car, the seller's duty to transfer ownership is totally suspended until the buyer fully pays the price. On the flip side, a resolutory condition kills an existing active obligation. Think of a pacto de retro sale. The buyer gets to enjoy the property, but if the seller exercises their right to repurchase it within a set time, that buyer's right is completely extinguished. It's gone.
This brings us to another flavor profile that shows up on exams all the time. Guaranteed. Joint versus solidary obligations. In a joint obligation, it's kind of like roommates splitting rent proportionately. Each debtor is only liable for their own specific slice of the debt pie. But in a solidary obligation, think all for one. If 5 people owe a solidary debt, the creditor can squeeze the entire debt amount out of just one unlucky passive subject. Yep, and then that poor debtor has to go and hunt down the other 4 to seek reimbursement.
We also really need to compare alternative and facultative obligations. So, in an alternative obligation, the debtor gets to choose just one of many agreed-upon prestations to perform. Like if I agree to give you my watch, my phone, or my laptop, giving you just the watch fulfills the whole deal. In a facultative obligation, though, only one specific prestation is actually due. Let's say my laptop. But I am given a substitute player option, meaning I can deliver my tablet instead if I need to.
All right, level 4, valid contract essentials.
While the Philippine Civil Code highlights consent, object, and cause, let's look at how the 6 universal elements of global contract law build a really complete picture here. First, you need an offer and acceptance, leading to awareness. This is that true meeting of the minds you always hear about. You also need legal capacity, meaning no minors or people who are, say, extremely intoxicated can be bound. The contract obviously must possess legality, meaning a lawful purpose. And crucially, there must be consideration, or a cause. This is the value being exchanged. And hey, here's a really fun fact from global case law. Like the famous Chappell versus Nestle case, consideration only needs to be sufficient, not necessarily adequate. Crazy, right? Contract law literally doesn't care if you made a bad bargain. It just cares that some value, even a candy wrapper, was exchanged.
Level 5, void versus voidable.
Now, this features arguably the single most confusing matchup for law students. When a contract goes wrong and those essentials we just talked about aren't met, how exactly does it fail? The absolutely crucial point here is understanding the stark difference between void and voidable. A void contract is completely dead on arrival. It literally never existed legally. If you make a contract to sell illegal drugs, the law treats it like a ghost. You cannot enforce it ever. A voidable contract, however, is a living, breathing, perfectly valid contract, right up until it gets canceled. So if someone forced you under duress to sign a document, or if you are a minor, the contract is completely enforceable until you, the victim, step up to court and actually choose to cancel or rescind it.
Finally, level 6, how obligations die.
Because as we know in law, no obligation is meant to last an eternity. Eventually, those invisible legal handcuffs need to come off. This is called extinguishment. Let's blast through these main modes of extinguishment. First up is payment or performance. Now, this isn't just handing over cash. It requires the integrity and identity of payment, meaning you must perform the exact duty completely. Then there's loss of the thing due. So if the specific determinate item is destroyed by a fortuitous event, the obligation might just die. We also have condonation, which is basically generous forgiveness by the creditor. Confusion is super interesting. It's when the characters of debtor and creditor merge into one person. Think of a big company absorbing a smaller company that owed it money. It obviously can't owe itself. Compensation is a mutual set-off of debts between two people who owe each other money. And finally, novation, which extinguishes an old obligation by substituting a new debtor or a completely new object.
But wait, what if you actually want to pay, but your creditor is being incredibly stubborn and just refuses your valid payment? Well, you use a legal cheat code called consignation. If you tender payment and the creditor unjustifiably refuses it, you don't just have to stay in debt forever. No way. You can legally wash your hands of the entire obligation by depositing that exact amount with the judicial authorities or the court. Boom, handcuffs off. Finally, let's look at 2 really unique ways to extinguish debts when cash is tight. Dictation in payment is when you give away a piece of property, like say your car, to settle a specific monetary loan. It actually triggers the law on sales because it's kind of like the creditor is buying your car using your debt as the purchase price. Payment by cession, on the other hand, is way more extreme. This is when a debtor is completely insolvent and surrenders absolutely all their properties to multiple creditors. Those creditors then sell the properties off and share the proceeds.
And just like that, you've beaten all 6 levels. See? Oblicon doesn't have to be some terrifying monster. It really is just a highly structured game of human relationships. You now know the anatomy, the sources, the flavors, what makes a contract valid, how they fail, and exactly how they die. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. Now that you have the ultimate survival playbook in your hands, how will you use these structural rules to absolutely crush your next Oblicon exam? I hope you're feeling pumped and ready to tackle your studies. Share your key takeaways with us, keep studying hard, and I will see you in the next explainer.